A boy named Norman lived in a small city in England. He had a special power to talk to people who had passed away. However, nobody believed him and thought he was crazy. Norman could even communicate with his late grandmother at home. He tried to make his mother, father, and sister believe that his grandmother was still with them, but they didn't believe him. Norman's father would always remind him that his grandmother had passed away. Norman insisted that he was telling the truth and that his grandmother spoke to him. His mother acknowledged that his grandmother was close to him, but she explained that she was no longer in this world and they needed to move on with their lives. Norman's father believed that his uncle was influencing him because his uncle also had the ability to communicate with the deceased. However, Norman's mother clarified that Norman didn't meet with his uncle because she had forbidden him to do so. This confusion made Norman very worried. The next day at school, nobody talked to him because they all thought he was crazy. There was a boy named Alvin who would tease him relentlessly. Then, Norman's uncle, named Prendergast, appeared. He also had the ability to communicate with the deceased, just like Norman. He could even see them. He was protecting the city from a witch's curse. According to the story, 300 years ago, a witch had cursed 7 people, causing them to die. However, their bodies would come out of their graves every year. The only way to stop the curse was to tell the tale of Sleeping Beauty near the witch's grave every year. This would temporarily stop the curse for 1 year. Norman's uncle would read the book near the witch's grave to stop the curse. Now, Norman's uncle Prendergast was getting old and wanted someone else to take over his duty. On the flip side, it turns out that a play was being performed for that witch at Norman's school. Norman was also a part of it. While everyone was practicing for the play, Alvin started teasing Norman again. This made everyone upset. Norman felt really sad about it. Just then, a big boy named Neil came up to him. He wanted to be friends with Norman because he didn't have any friends either. All the other students used to make fun of Neil because he was overweight and had allergies. They both left school, and on their way home, Norman's uncle Prendergast stopped them. Norman told his uncle that his parents had forbidden him to talk to him. Prendergast said, "Your parents don't want you talking to me because I can communicate with the dead, just like you can. And they haven't told you about the witch's curse." Norman replied, "But we're learning about it in school." Prendergast warned him that there were many secrets about the witch that he didn't know. Neil thought Prendergast was crazy and started hitting him. Norman had to explain to Neil that Prendergast was his uncle. Neil was shocked and asked Norman if it was true that he could talk to the dead. Excited, Neil went with Norman to his house to ask about his dead dog. Neil wondered if everyone could come back to life after death. Norman shared what his grandmother had told him: only those who die suddenly or solve a riddle can come back. When Norman showed Neil his dog, Neil was overjoyed, and they both had a great time together. On the other hand, Prendergast appears. He was furious because Neil had scared him away. He pulls out the storybook of Sleeping Beauty. He wanted to give this book to Norman. Suddenly, he has a heart attack and passes away. Meanwhile, Norman's school is shown where a play about the witch is being performed. Many people had gathered to watch the play. Norman realizes that everything has changed. He finds himself in a forest where he sees the 7 deceased people and a scary tree that tries to grab him. Norman warns everyone that the 7 zombies are coming. People make fun of him and his father gets mad. His father tells Norman to stop immediately. Norman's mother explains that his father is worried about bad things happening. Norman reassures his mother that his father shouldn't be scared. The next day at school, students tease him, so Norman locks himself in the bathroom. Suddenly, everything starts shaking. The spirit of his uncle, Prendergast, appears. Norman tells his uncle to leave, but his uncle insists on staying until Norman fulfills his duty. His uncle reveals that Norman must tell the story to the witch that night, or else the witch's ghost and the ghosts of the 7 dead people will awaken. Norman protests, saying he's just a kid. "How can I do this?" Norman's uncle instructs him, "You have to read my storybook about the witch's burial place." Norman asks his uncle, "Where's the book?" His uncle replies, "It is near my dead body. You have to bring it when you visit my house, and you have to read it near the witch's grave before sunset." Norman promises his uncle that he will complete this task. Later, his uncle's soul departs from there. Alvin overhears Norman's words, but gets angry and chases after him. Norman manages to escape. Meanwhile, Norman's parents go out for a meal, leaving his sister with him at home. Norman is worried about what to do because the sun is about to set. Just then, Neil comes and calls Norman to play hockey through the window. Norman tells Neil, "Prendergast's soul appeared to me. He told me that the witch's curse is real. I have to go to the witch's grave before sunset." Neil warns Norman about the risks involved, but Norman insists on doing it alone. Suddenly, Norman's late grandmother appears and tells him that she could have gone to heaven, but she stayed to take care of him. Norman shares his concerns with his grandmother, and she advises him not to fear his duty. Norman understands and decides to go to Prendergast's house to fulfill his duty. Alvin was having a party with his friends when suddenly Norman passed by. Alvin tripped and became really angry. Meanwhile, Norman arrived at his uncle's house, which was very old and damaged. When he got there, he went to his uncle's lifeless body. He noticed a book in his hand and tried his best to take it. After a lot of struggle, he finally managed to get the book. In a hurry, he went to the witch's grave and started reading the story of Sleeping Beauty. Just then, Alvin showed up and snatched the book from Norman. As the sun set, the witch's soul was set free, and she brought back all the 7 dead people with her. They all rose from their graves. Seeing this, Norman tried reading the book again, but it had no effect. Meanwhile, Norman's sister went to Neil's house to find out about Norman. Neil said he knew nothing about him. At the same time, Neil's brother asked him where Norman was. Neil told him that Norman had gone to the ancient cemetery. His brother warned that the place was very dangerous. They all set off to find Norman. On the other hand, Norman and Alvin hid in Prendergast's house to protect themselves. Norman couldn't understand why the book didn't work, so he went into Prendergast's room. Alvin asked him what he was doing, and Norman explained that his uncle had told him the curse of the witch could be stopped with the book. He had thought there would be a spell in it, but instead, it was just a story about Sleeping Beauty. Norman discovered the pictures of those 7 individuals. They were the ones that the witch had cursed. There was an additional photo that showed the 7 graves of those people. Norman now understands that the witch's grave was not among them, where he had read the book. Suddenly, the ghosts of the deceased people appear and damage the door, scaring Alvin and Norman. Meanwhile, Neil and Norman's sister are seen heading towards the ancient graveyard to find Norman. Just then, Alvin and Norman appear in front of their car, causing them to lose control and crash into a dead body. They quickly drive away, but one of the dead bodies ends up on their vehicle. They discuss how to stop the attack of these dead bodies, and Norman suggests that he needs to read the book at the witch's grave. Norman calls one of his friends and says they need to find out where the witch was buried. His friend informs him that sorcerers are not considered human beings, and the witch was buried in a place without a grave marker. After searching online, Norman's friend tells him that a lawsuit was filed against the witch in that town. They decide to go there to find out more. Meanwhile, the dead bodies continue to roam the city, causing trouble for the people. However, when they encounter strange objects, they become scared themselves. The crowd then attacks them together. Finally, Norman and the others arrive in the town and discover numerous records. They are worried because they have to search through all the records to find information about the witch. Where was the witch buried? The crowd made the dead bodies worse by beating them, causing them to run away and reach the town hall. Everyone followed and attacked the dead bodies. Norman's sister suggested leaving, feeling scared. Norman insisted on searching for the witch's grave, despite feeling frightened. His sister didn't listen, making Norman angry. Everyone left Norman alone, and the dead bodies entered. Norman climbed onto a roof and saw the witch's ghost wandering. He tried telling her the story of Sleeping Beauty, but she attacked him. Norman fell and lost consciousness, seeing the witch as a little girl named Aggie who could see ghosts like him. People accused her of sorcery, and she was sentenced to death. When Norman woke up, the dead bodies asked him to read a book so they could return to their graves. They were after him because of this. Norman was shocked and angry, asking why they treated the innocent girl that way. The dead bodies admitted their mistake and asked for Norman's help to break the curse. They explained that someone must read the story to the girl each year, and it was now Norman's responsibility. Someone reads the story to the little girl every year, starting with my uncle and now me. This curse seems never-ending, but I will do whatever it takes to break it. As Norman steps outside, the ghosts of the dead bodies appear and people start attacking them. However, Norman stops them and pleads for mercy. His friends stand by his side, and his sister announces that he wants to save everyone from the harm caused by these spirits. Norman explains that they were once human beings and cannot harm them anymore, but a witch becomes aggressive and attacks them all. Norman takes his parents and the judge who sentenced the punishment to the little girl to the grave where she was buried. The trees in the forest start communicating and allow only Norman to approach. He wants to talk to the girl and she asks who he is. Norman replies that they are similar and she attacks him. She reveals that she has burned the book and doesn't want to hear any more stories. Norman refuses to leave her alone and shares the story of a unique little girl who can communicate with ghosts. The villagers were afraid of her and ended her life, but her soul remained filled with rage. She attacks Norman out of revenge, just like the 7 people before her. She says, "I just want to reveal how terrible those 7 individuals were." She explains, "I am not wicked." Norman exclaims, "Put an end to all of this. Just consider your life and remember that there was someone who loved you." Then, Norman takes her hand and they arrive in the same world, where the mother of that young girl used to narrate her story. She informs Norman, "My mother used to narrate the story here. That story always had a happy ending. One day, those cruel individuals came here, and they snatched me away, separating me from my mother." Norman reassures her, "Some people turn wicked out of fear. I don't believe you are a witch. I only believe you are a young girl. It is our special gift that we can see the departed individuals and even communicate with them." Norman adds, "We should not become wicked like those with evil intentions. What will set us apart from them if we also become bad people?" Then the young girl longs for her mother and asks Norman, "What kind of ending did that story have that you were sharing with me?" Norman replies that its ending is in your hands. Only you have the power to conclude this. Now the young girl sits under a tree. Norman suggests to her, "It is the best spot to rest. You will reunite with your mother after resting here." The young girl falls asleep there. Eventually, her soul is liberated from that place, and Norman returns to the real world, where the souls of those 7 deceased individuals are also set free. Norman's parents feel immense pride in him. Following this, it is depicted that everything has returned to normal in the city. Norman expresses gratitude to Neil, who had supported him greatly. Now, Norman had begun living with his parents happily, and they had also started to have trust in him. And the movie concludes with this scene here. Okay guys, if you enjoyed the story, please like and subscribe to this channel.